An 18-year-old girl, armed with a loaded gun, sneaks into a house. She catches her 33-year-old boyfriend in bed with another woman. Moments later, she's lying on the floor, dying from a gunshot wound. But here's the twist: her gun was never fired. Tonight, we're unraveling one of Indiana's most shocking cases this year. A story where a massive age gap screamed trouble, where social media exploded with fury after a tragedy, and where a young mom's life ended in a stranger's bedroom, clutching a weapon she never used. This isn't just a messy breakup turned deadly. It's a dark tale of power, control, and what happens when a teenager gets tangled up with a man who's lived nearly twice as long as she has. The person who shot her that night swears it was self-defense. They claim they had no choice. But when you hear what the police dug up, about the manipulation, the toxic relationship, and the truth of those final moments, you might start to doubt their story. We're going to break this case down step by step, because the deeper you dig, the more unsettling it gets. This isn't just a love triangle gone bad. It's about grooming, betrayal, and a justice system wrestling with a big question: was this a justified killing, or a cold-blooded murder dressed up as self-defense? By the end of this episode, you'll see why this case has torn communities apart, why loved ones are screaming for justice, and why some say this tragedy proves we can't ignore the red flags of toxic relationships. But first, let's meet the real person behind the headlines. Before she became a news story, this 18-year-old had dreams, struggles, and a desperate fight to break free. Her story is what makes this case so gut-wrenching. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell us where you're tuning in from tonight. And here's something to think about as we go through this: when should friends or family step in if they see someone they love trapped in a bad relationship? Your thoughts could spark some powerful discussions below. What you're about to hear will flip everything you think you know about self-defense, age gaps, and who the law really protects. Let's start with a young woman whose life was just beginning, and find out how she ended up in the deadliest moment imaginable. Her name was Shamaya Ny'Air Allen. 2 years ago, if you'd met Shamaya Ny'Air Allen, you'd have thought she had life all sorted out. Born on Valentine's Day, 2006, she was a teenager with the wisdom of someone much older. While other kids her age obsessed over school or weekend plans, Shamaya was already chasing her dreams. She worked steadily at Olive Garden, where her coworkers couldn't stop raving about her reliability and grit. But her true love was tattoo artistry. With a needle in her hand, she created jaw-dropping designs that left artists twice her age in awe. At just 18, Shamaya was also a mom to a little boy named Future. Motherhood lit a fire in her. She poured her heart into her son, picking up extra shifts to make sure he had everything he needed. Her family looked at her with pride, juggling work, art, and parenting like a pro. They called her their baby girl princess, and her mom often said she was her mini-me. To them, Shamaya was a perfect blend of all their best traits. She was outgoing, warm, and had a spark that could light up any room. Her laugh was contagious, her style bold and fearless. At family gatherings, everyone was drawn to her vibrant energy. But around her 16th birthday, something shifted. At first, the changes were small, easy to miss. She started keeping secrets about where she was and who she was with. Phone calls that used to happen out in the open moved to hushed conversations behind closed doors. At family dinners, where she used to steal the show, she was distracted, glued to her phone. Her mom and sister started asking questions. Who was this new person in her life? Why was Shamaya suddenly so private about her relationships? But she'd shrug them off with typical teenage attitude. She was old enough to make her own choices. She could handle her own problems. She didn't need anyone's advice. As months went by, the changes grew harder to ignore. Shamaya's usual confidence started to crack. Some days, she seemed tense, snapping over things that never used to bother her. Her family noticed more arguments, more emotional outbursts over tiny issues. Then came the moment that shook everyone who loved her. In September 2024, Shamaya was arrested. She faced charges of misdemeanor domestic battery and criminal mischief. The police said she'd damaged someone's property and gotten into a physical fight during what they called a domestic dispute. For a young woman who'd never had a run-in with the law, this was totally unlike her. Her family was stunned. This wasn't the Shamaya they knew. She'd always been full of fire, sure, but never violent, never destructive. The arrest screamed that something had pushed her to the edge, but she wouldn't spill a single detail. When her family tried to figure out what was going on, Shamaya got defensive. "I can handle my life," she'd snap. She was an adult now, she'd remind them. She had a son to think about. She didn't need their meddling. But her loved ones could see something was eating away at her. The bright, open teenager who used to share everything had turned secretive, pulling away from everyone. The confident young woman who seemed to have it all together was clearly battling something she wouldn't, or couldn't, talk about. By December 2024, Shamaya landed in jail briefly over those September charges. Her family felt helpless, watching the girl they adored get tangled in a mess she wouldn't let them help unravel. It was heartbreaking to see someone with so much promise, a gifted artist, a loving mom, a cherished daughter and sister, turn into someone they barely recognized. The Shamaya who once told her family everything had built walls no one could climb. Those closest to her could feel that something in her private life was breaking her down, piece by piece. But Shamaya was stubborn, determined to deal with it all on her own, even as everyone around her saw her struggling with something way too big for her to handle alone. Looking back, her family now sees they were watching someone trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape, fighting battles she couldn't win, all while pretending everything was fine. What they didn't know yet was just how deadly that situation had become. The person behind Shamaya's transformation had a name, Brian Jackson. And once you hear about Brian, everything about her changes starts to click. He was 33 years old when he came into Shamaya's life. She was just 16. Think about that for a second. While Shamaya was learning to drive and dreaming about college, Brian Jackson was a grown man who'd already lived nearly twice as long as she had. Brian Jackson was a master at twisting situations to get what he wanted. He knew how to read people, spot their weaknesses, and make them crave his approval. At 16, Shamaya was the perfect target for someone like him. She acted older than her years, juggling a job and grown-up responsibilities. She was stunning, talented, and confident, seemingly independent. But beneath that bold exterior was still a teenager hungry for love and validation, with no clue how to spot a predator's tricks. Jackson didn't treat this like a normal relationship. This was grooming, pure and simple. He started by making Shamaya feel like she was one in a million, special, chosen, way more mature than other girls her age. He likely told her she was unique, that she got him like no one else could. He convinced her their age gap didn't matter because she was so grown up, so ready for a serious relationship. What Shamaya didn't see was that Jackson had no plans for the loyal, exclusive love she thought she'd found. Jackson lived what he called a polyamorous lifestyle, but it was just a fancy excuse for juggling multiple women while demanding total devotion from each. This wasn't real polyamory, where everyone agrees to the setup. It was manipulation dressed up as something trendy. Jackson expected Shamaya to be okay with him having other lovers, including at least one woman he was married to or deeply involved with. But when Shamaya so much as glanced at someone else, he turned possessive, controlling her every move. For a teenager who thought she'd found true love, this betrayal hit like a gut punch. Jackson had her trapped. She was already hooked on him, craving his approval, and cut off from friends and family who might have helped her see the truth. The toll on Shamaya was crushing. She was stuck in a constant battle for his attention, forced to share the man she loved with other women, always afraid he'd pick someone else over her. That kind of emotional roller coaster would have been brutal for a grown woman, let alone a 16-year-old. Jackson played her like a pro. He'd shower her with love and attention when she played by his rules, but the second she questioned his other relationships, he'd pull back, leaving her desperate. He made her feel like she was the problem, like she was too immature or clingy for being hurt by his cheating ways. Jackson convinced Shamaya that if she really loved him, she'd accept his so-called lifestyle. The power gap between them was massive. He had money she didn't. He had years of life experience she couldn't match. He was a master at emotional manipulation, and she had no way to defend herself. Worst of all, he could walk away from their relationship without losing a thing, while Shamaya felt like losing him would destroy her entire world. Over time, this toxic dynamic crushed her self-worth. She started believing she had to earn his love by going along with whatever he wanted. Instead of seeing his other relationships as betrayal, she saw them as a contest she had to win. Let's stop here for a second and ask you something big. What would you do if you found out your partner was secretly involved with other people after making you think you were their one and only? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this case is opening your eyes to warning signs in relationships, hit that subscribe button. We dig into stories like this that expose dangerous patterns. By late 2024 and early 2025, Shamaya was at her breaking point over and over. She was worn out from the endless emotional chaos. She was sick of sharing the father of her child with other women. She was desperate for the exclusive love Jackson had hinted at but never delivered. Meanwhile, Jackson didn't change a bit. If anything, he seemed to thrive on the drama, loving how the women in his life fought for his attention. It fed his ego, making him feel powerful and wanted. Friends and family saw Shamaya fading away, torn apart by someone who claimed to care about her. They watched her confidence crumble, her joy vanish, and her bright future grow dim as she became obsessed with winning a game that was rigged from the start. The relationship was a brutal cycle of hope and heartbreak. Jackson would promise to change, but those promises were empty. He'd tease the idea of commitment, giving Shamaya just enough hope to keep her hooked, only to yank it away when she started to believe him. The worst part? He knew exactly how much control he had over her. He knew she was young, inexperienced, and completely wrapped up in him. Jackson knew Shamaya thought he was the father of her child, which made it nearly impossible for her to walk away. He knew she'd cut herself off from family and friends who could have helped her break free. But on January 29, 2025, something happened that finally pushed her past her limit. She caught Jackson in bed with another woman. This wasn't just a flirty text or a casual dinner with someone else, it was him, physically with another woman, in what Shamaya thought was their space, during their time. For a young woman who'd spent years swallowing his betrayals, walking in on this scene shattered the last shred of hope she'd clung to about their relationship. Shamaya stormed out of Jackson's house that day, carrying more than just a broken heart. She was burning with a fury that had been building for years, fueled by a betrayal deeper than anything she'd faced before, and she had a gun she was ready to use. What happened next would decide whether Shamaya could finally escape Jackson's grip or if confronting him would cost her everything. Night was falling over Anderson, Indiana, when Shamaya made a choice that would end her life. Around 8:30 p.m., she went back to Jackson's house on the 2400 block of Lincoln Street. But this wasn't the same vulnerable girl who'd left earlier that day. This was someone who'd had enough, someone who'd spent hours stewing over what she'd seen, letting rage take over the pain that had ruled her for so long. Shamaya didn't show up empty-handed. She'd made the deliberate choice to bring a handgun. Whether she planned to use it to scare him, protect herself, or something darker, we may never know. But that gun turned what could have been another tearful argument into a deadly showdown. When Shamaya got to Jackson's house, she didn't knock or wait for an invite. According to witnesses who later talked to the police, she forced her way in, breaking or damaging the door. This wasn't someone looking for a calm talk. This was a young woman taking back control after feeling powerless for too long. Inside, Jackson was still with the same woman Shamaya had caught him with earlier. Neither of them expected her to come back, especially not like this. The woman who'd been with Jackson suddenly found herself staring down his teenage girlfriend, Shamaya, who was gripping a gun and shaking with fury. What happened next unfolded in a flash, but those moments would be key to figuring out who was truly to blame. The woman later told police that Shamaya burst into the house, clearly furious and waving the gun. According to her story, Shamaya didn't just yell at Jackson for betraying her, she turned her anger on the other woman, too, blaming her for being part of the heartbreak. Words turned into a fight. Shamaya didn't stop at shouting. She lunged at the woman, and the two started wrestling in a violent clash. Months of bottled-up rage and humiliation poured out in a chaotic brawl. In the middle of this mess, someone in the house managed to call 911. The call came in around 8:30 p.m., with the caller shouting that an 18-year-old had shown up with a gun. The dispatcher could hear yelling and chaos in the background, signaling a dangerous situation that needed cops on the scene fast. But Jackson wasn't just standing there watching the fight. Witnesses said he jumped into the fray, but not to calm things down. Instead, he grabbed his own gun. What happened in those next few seconds would be argued over later, but one thing was clear: a gunshot blasted through the house, so loud that neighbors heard it from their own homes. When the echo faded, Shamaya was crumpled on the floor, bleeding from a gunshot wound. Anderson police were already speeding toward the house when the shot rang out. They'd been sent the moment the 911 call came in, knowing a domestic fight with guns was a ticking time bomb. When they pulled up to Jackson's house minutes later, they walked into a scene of total chaos and conflicting stories. Shamaya was on the floor, barely clinging to life, blood pooling around her from a single bullet wound. Jackson and the other woman were still there, both swearing Shamaya had been the attacker, both claiming the shooting was the only way to stop her. Paramedics rushed in soon after the cops, working desperately to keep Shamaya alive. They gave her emergency care right there on the scene before speeding her to the nearest trauma center. But even as they fought to save her, everyone could see her injuries were devastating. Right away, Jackson started spinning his story to the cops. He claimed Shamaya had busted into his house, hell-bent on hurting him and the woman with him. He said she'd threatened to kill them both, attacked his companion in a wild rage, and left him no choice but to shoot her to save their lives. In his telling, he was the victim, fending off a crazed teenager who'd stormed in ready to kill. The other woman backed him up, saying Shamaya had forced her way in, gun in hand, furious, and had attacked her before Jackson stepped in to protect them. But even as Jackson told his tale, something felt off. The scene didn't quite match his story, and the police noticed details that raised red flags. Those inconsistencies would become critical as the investigation dug deeper. Meanwhile, Shamaya was fighting for her life in the hospital. Doctors and nurses battled to save the young woman who'd gone to Jackson's house looking for answers and ended up with a bullet in her body. Despite their efforts, it wasn't enough. In the early hours of January 30, 2025, Shamaya Ny'Air Allen was pronounced dead. She was just 18, a devoted mom to a toddler who'd now grow up without her, a beloved daughter her family would never hug again. Brian Jackson's claim of self-defense had ended the life of the teenager he'd been with for 2 years. The girl who'd loved him, fought for him, and finally confronted his betrayals was gone forever. As investigators started combing through the crime scene, doubts about Jackson's story began to creep in. Sometimes, the evidence tells a different truth than what the survivors want the police to believe. While Jackson painted himself as a desperate man escaping death, forensic experts were quietly gathering clues that suggested a very different story. When crime scene techs checked Shamaya's handgun, they uncovered a bombshell that flipped Jackson's story upside down. Despite his claims that Shamaya was out to kill him and his companion, despite his insistence that he had no choice but to shoot to save their lives, the truth was undeniable: Shamaya's gun hadn't fired a single shot. Her weapon was fully loaded, with the safety off, hinting she might have been ready to use it, but she never did. Not one bullet left her gun during the fight that ended her life. This discovery punched a hole in Jackson's self-defense story. If Shamaya didn't shoot, what exactly was he defending himself from? A gun that was never fired suggested she was threatening or intimidating, not actively trying to kill anyone. The ballistics team then zeroed in on the bullet that killed Shamaya, and what they found was chilling. The shot was fired from close range, but the angle and gunpowder patterns told a different story than Jackson's. It wasn't a panicked shot in the middle of a wild struggle. The evidence pointed to Jackson having enough time and space to aim and fire on purpose. These findings didn't match the story of a desperate man fighting for his life. They suggested someone who'd taken control of the situation and chose to pull the trigger. Even worse for Jackson's credibility was what he did after Shamaya's death. While her family was heartbroken, planning her funeral, Jackson posted something on social media that left the community stunned. Witnesses who saw the post before it was deleted said Jackson seemed to be bragging about the deadly fight. His words suggested he was proud that 2 women had fought over him, with one ending up dead. People in the community were horrified, describing the post as Jackson gloating about Shamaya's death. It wasn't the behavior of a shaken survivor, it was the act of someone who seemed to revel in the tragedy. His post painted him as someone who saw Shamaya's death as a twisted win, not a heartbreaking loss. As detectives dug deeper, more cracks appeared in Jackson's story. The timeline and his version of events didn't line up with the physical evidence. His claim of feeling threatened didn't match the forensic picture of what went down in that bedroom. Investigators also started looking into Jackson's relationship with Shamaya, uncovering a 2-year pattern of manipulation and control. This gave them a clear motive. Shamaya catching him with another woman wasn't just a betrayal, it was a direct challenge to the power he'd carefully built over her. The investigation showed this wasn't a simple case of a homeowner fending off a dangerous intruder. It was the climax of a toxic relationship where an older man had preyed on a teenager, and when she finally stood up to him, he decided to end her life for good. The community erupted in outrage. People in Anderson branded Jackson a predator and demanded justice for Shamaya. The huge age gap in their relationship, which had always raised eyebrows, now looked downright sinister after her death. Just days after finishing their initial forensic work, Anderson police made their move. They arrested Brian Jackson and charged him with murder in Shamaya Ny'Air Allen's death. His self-defense story had fallen apart under the weight of the evidence. The Madison County District Attorney's Office hit him with second-degree murder charges, signaling they believed this was a deliberate killing, not a desperate act of survival. They also added charges for using a gun during a crime. Jackson's arrest gave Shamaya's grieving family a sliver of relief, but they knew the fight was far from over. The evidence had exposed Jackson's lies, but convincing a jury beyond a reasonable doubt would be the real challenge. The case he thought he could spin with manipulation was now in the hands of the courts. As of today, Jackson sits behind bars, awaiting trial. A Madison County judge refused to let him out on bail, saying he's too dangerous to be free while his case moves forward. Jackson has pleaded not guilty, sticking to his self-defense claim, even though the evidence tells a different story. Legal experts say if he's convicted of second-degree murder, he could face 45 to 65 years in prison. For Shamaya's family, nothing short of the maximum sentence will feel like justice. They want to make sure Jackson can never prey on another young woman like he did their daughter. The trial is set for late 2025 or early 2026, and Shamaya's loved ones plan to pack the courtroom. They wear pink, Shamaya's favorite color, to every hearing, a powerful reminder of who this case is really about. But for her family, justice in court is only part of honoring Shamaya. They've set up a fund in her name to support her son, futures, education and to help other young moms escape abusive relationships. They're turning their heartbreak into a mission to protect others from the same pain. Shamaya's mom keeps her daughter's memory alive on social media, using hashtags like #LongLiveShamaya to celebrate her life. On what would have been Shamaya's 19th birthday, the family held a balloon release, where friends and relatives shared happy memories, focusing on her life, not just her tragic end. Shamaya's story has sparked big conversations in Anderson and beyond about age gap relationships and the risks teenagers face when they get involved with much older partners. Local groups are using her story to push for better education in schools about spotting unhealthy relationships. Most of all, Shamaya's story has become a warning about trusting your gut when something feels off about a loved one's relationship. Her family now urges others to speak up when they see troubling changes in someone they care about, even if that person insists they're fine. Shamaya Ny'Air Allen's life was cut short, but her story isn't over. As her family fights for justice and her community rallies to protect others, her legacy lives on. Join us next time as we uncover more stories that demand to be heard. Share your thoughts below. When should we step in to help someone we love? Stay tuned, and let's keep the conversation going.